Meanwhile, African Americans comprise 68% of the player population in the NFL and 74%, in the NBA. That number is just 8% in baseball, with only 69 African Americans on the opening day rosters and disabled list this season. Orioles center fielder Adam Jones highlighted that point to USA Today Sports when responding to criticism that Major League Baseball's lack of a Colin Kaepernick-like protest is because, quote, baseball is a white man's sport. Jones joined SportsCenter to further those comments.
You look around in baseball, and if you see what you see, and I don't know whose eyes other people what they see, but through my eyes, I see the majority of white players, and it's not a problem. It's not like I'm saying, oh, we need more black players, we need to do this and do that. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is he asked me a question, and I answered it simply as that, and with the backing of it, knowing that the numbers backed up my statement. And like I said, we play in such a numbers game, sabermetrics. Everything is always valued by numbers these days. So why, when I threw out a number, did I get backlash from it? I'm just speaking the truth.
So Stephen A. Jones saying he's basing his point there on facts. Does he have a point?
He absolutely does. Adam Jones is 1,000% right, and let me say that I stand in complete concert with everything that he said, and I applaud his willingness to say it because he speaks the truth. He's a highly intelligent brother. I'm very, very proud of him. Not to mention the fact that he's not a scrub. He's batting like 280. He's got about 27 home runs. This is not some dude riding the bench that's just opening his mouth. Adam Jones can play the game of baseball. And so let's analyze what he had to say. Who can refute what he's saying? 8% of Major League Baseball is African American. Now, let's be clear. That's not entirely Major League Baseball's fault. Is there more that they can do? Certainly so. They have their RBI program, which is called Reviving Baseball in the Inner City, and they've made a concerted effort. And some of the white ball players in Major League Baseball, like Mark Teixeira, he comes to mind, have put forth tremendous efforts in helping their cause in that regard, and they're to be applauded for it. But far more often than not, Major League Baseball's desire is to go to other countries, the Dominican, Venezuela, and others. You might get individuals with a darker pigmentation, but they're black Latinos, for example, for lack of a better...
Afro-Caribbean.
They're Afro-Caribbean. You could look at it that way. That's what they elect to go through. Understand that those individuals are not going to challenge the very fabric of America and what it's all about. They're coming from impoverished backgrounds. And I don't want to call it a third world country. Maybe you could speak to that better than me.
Developing nation.
But developing nations. They get over to the United States of America. All they're looking to do is play baseball, make some money, give some money back to their family in their respective countries, etc., and go on from there. If you are an African American, you're isolated in the sport of Major League Baseball. And when he says that it's a white sport, and that's why you're not seeing anybody stand up, that's absolutely true. Now, some people would sit there and say, well, it's wrong. Well, we have to debate that too, because if you are a white individual and you don't understand nor comprehend the plight of African Americans in this country from a detailed perspective, you're not going to be gung-ho about standing up and stepping up and saying, I want to join them in this fight that I have very little comprehension about. But we also have to take into account the fact that Major League Baseball is incredibly insulated. They are about doing things their way. And I'm not talking about the sport from a governing position. I'm talking about the players, the tradition, the culture, and what they try to enforce upon individuals that come into the sport. We have several incidences in the world of sports that we have pointed to, Max, over the last 2 or 3 years alone, where white players have stepped up. Whether it's the Hispanic player from that used to be in Milwaukee and then was in Houston, I forgot his name, but he was very rambunctious and very demonstrative and bombastic. I think so. I think it was Carlos Gomez. That's right. When one of the players had a problem with him running around the bases.
McCann?
Yeah, I think
Brian
it was
McCann when he was in Atlanta.
Yeah, exactly. That was Brian McCann, but there was another incident when he was in Houston. I just forget the details. My point is that there were players that were saying, there's a way you're supposed to conduct yourself if you're going to be here. There's a certain way that we do things in this sport, and that is the way that it is going to be. And baseball, more than any other sport in America, makes it very, very clear that there's a specific level of decorum they mandate that you display and exercise if you're going to be accepted and embraced by this culture. That is not going to be the same people that's going to turn around and jump up in arms and lock arms like the Seattle Seahawks did, or some members with Kansas City did, and others, or kneel down for the national anthem and express empathy and sympathy and sensitivity for Colin Kaepernick and what he's brought attention to. It's just not going to happen. So Adam Jones' willingness to point that out is something that I appreciate, because it also highlights why baseball is sort of lagging behind. If you see the growing audience in the NBA, growing audience in the NFL, baseball has its numbers, but its audience is relatively the same. They sort of alienated themselves from a younger generation, and this is one of the reasons why, which is what Adam Jones pointed to.
There is so much here to unpack. Let me start with what I referenced the other day. Josh Marshall of Talking Points Memo has been tweeting about it. The idea of this multiracial coalition in this country, which has become maybe the dominant social political force, which is one of the reasons that in this climate, the NFL, I think, is reacting well to the protests. And in fact, even there's a national election going on that's a referendum on this multiracial coalition moving forward versus, essentially, if you look at likely voters, older white people who want to maintain the status quo, mainly because they're angry and want and have enjoyed the status quo, and the world is changing. So like, that's the context in which we're talking about all of this. Baseball, before we get to Adam Jones, who is not only an excellent player for a number of years, but embodies the right way to play the game, according to the baseball ethos. You know, this guy is it has that kind of puritanical, hardworking, old school baseball humility and work ethic everyone loves. I would say one of the reasons you don't have a lot of African-American players in baseball is baseball, I grew up with it. I love it. It's a cultural loving of baseball. But I admit, it's not as entertaining as basketball or football. I wish soccer fans would admit the same thing about soccer. You know, like, you grew up with it, I get it, you love it. It's not as good a product as basketball or football. So kids are more attracted generally. The audience is younger for basketball and football. But also, sport is used in this country for upward social mobility. I mean, if you're from the inner city and you can play, it can lift you out of poverty. And the returns on investment in basketball and football are much more predictable than in baseball. In other words, baseball is so mechanical, you can be an elite athlete. It's hard to say if you're going to make the major leagues. That's years away. But if you're elite in basketball or football, you have a better idea of how much of an impact you can have in those sports. The returns on your investment in those sports as an athlete are more predictable. And so that also funnels people of color who are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds to those sports. So, you know, just getting into a little bit the reasons for why African-American participation in the major league level has dropped from the mid-70s, where it was almost 30%, to now under 10%. There are various reasons for that. And is it safe to assume that, given that context, there will be less protest from people of color or people protesting issues that affect people of color in baseball than there is in basketball and football? Of course. Everything he said is absolutely true on its face.
Let me say this to you, and I don't know if anybody has ever said this to describe baseball. I don't know anybody that loves baseball more than my father. My father was from the West Indies, St. Thomas Virgin Islands. He was somebody that was drafted by the Giants in the 50s, but he and my mother got married, and obviously back then the money that you can make now, you couldn't make that money back then, so he had to go out there and earn an honest living, and as a result, you know, that his baseball career had to take a back seat. My father loves baseball. My father and I have debated this on many, many occasions, and I'll say it right now on national television. Sports is supposed to be the closest thing to a meritocracy, but when it comes to the sport of baseball, particularly as it pertains to the African-American community, it's viewed to some degree as too political. There's too much of a process to go through, and black folks are not prone to trust it the way they trust basketball, the way they trust football. Because, see, what happens is with basketball, now you got to play 1 year before you go to the NBA, but you can go and get the riches relatively quickly. Football, yes, you got to go to football for 2 to 3 years. You know, it's college football, but college football is so big time the notoriety that comes with it, it breeds a level of merit that you can believe and attach yourself to. So you look at that as a meritocracy to some degree, and it's believable. Whereas in the case of baseball, you could be a stud on a high school level, still got to go to minors. Chances are single A, double A, triple A, you know, we got to go through this, and then you got to hope that you fit on a team, and, you know, all of this other stuff. And I'm saying, I'm not addressing the veracity of it, because I understand there's nuances, but the impression to those within the African American community is that it requires an elevated level of trust in the system than the other sports do, and black folks ain't gonna do that.
The way I would say
they're just not gonna do that.
It's a more mechanical sport that you cannot impose your physical gifts on as much, and therefore it's harder to predict who will actually wind up good. And so the return of investment, as I said, not being as predictable, might as well go into the other sports, especially since they're more fun to watch and play. Lastly, I just want to say that we're talking about the culture of baseball also, the kind of no fun stuff in baseball. There's a certain way of doing things. And the reason I bring up this election year being a referendum on cultural changes in the United States, the multiracial coalition, you know, versus the kind of older conservative white coalition, is because that same thing has been being played out in baseball in recent years. There's a way to play the game. Yes, once upon a time that was true, but it is changing as other cultures come into the game, particularly Latin American cultures, etc. And a lot of what we see conflict on the baseball field when someone gets thrown at, or like McCann had a problem with what is essentially that clash of cultures. Wait a minute. There's a way I was brought up playing this game. Yes, but hold on a second. That way can be changing, and it reflects changes in our broader society.
But remember what you're saying. You're talking about the clash of cultures. Here's the problem with the clash. Black folks don't have a problem with the clash. Black folks know how to be confrontational. It's not really a problem for us, okay? The problem lies where...
Well, certainly not for you.
And never will be.
Not for me either.
But here's the deal. There we go. Right. But the fact is that even though there's a clash of cultures, there's still this feeling of inequity. Because what happens is, even though it's a clash of cultures, the culture that has been existing even since 1918, when you had a former Navy, a Navy soldier stand and salute during the national anthem while standing at third base in 1918, and the crowd stood in unison and they got all enthusiastic. And 12 years later, it was
they found out they could make some money doing this.
They could make some money doing it. But the point is that clash of cultures, there's still an inequity, because the culture that exists wants to squash the new culture from being on the come up. And that's where you have a problem.
Of course.
And black folks are convinced that they will lose that battle when it comes to the sport of baseball. So why bother?
Especially when it's not as fun to play. It's harder to predict if you can make money.
When there are options.
Of course.
We will leave it there. When we come back, Jimmy G leads the Pats to a huge road win in Week 1, but is it big enough to vault the Pats into the #1 spot on the ESPN.com Power Rankings? Find out that next.